Well, welcome everyone. This is our third webinar of the academic year for the Passport program. And our topic today is financial aid topics relevant to supporting Passport students. I want to thank our panelists who are going to present with us today. And you can see everyone's names, and I'd just like to start by having everyone introduce themselves. So we'll say our names, the institutions where we work, or the state agencies or organizations, your role, and where you're calling us from, the community that you're calling us from today. So I'll start. My name's Fred Kingston. I work for the College Success Foundation, where I'm the program manager for our statewide initiatives. So we do a lot of work supporting the Passport program, and I'm facilitating from Bellevue today. How about Maria and Rosie? Can you go next?
Yeah. Hello, everyone. I'm Maria Reyna, and I'm from Eastern Washington University, and I'm the designated support staff for our Passport scholars.
And I am Rosie Murray, and I'm the scholarship coordinator here at Eastern, and we're calling from Cheney, Washington.
All right. Dina and Emmanuel?
Hi, I'm Dina Murphy. I'm the financial aid manager at Western Washington University. We live in Bellingham, Washington.
Hello, I'm Emmanuel, and I am the designated support staff here that works with our Passport scholars.
All right. Carla and Dawn?
Hi, I'm Carla Idle-Corwin, and I'm the Senior Associate Director for Need-Based Programs and Operations here at the Washington Student Achievement Council. And primary responsibilities are overseeing all of the operations for all of the need-based programs, which includes Passport.
And I'm Dawn Cipriano McCafferty, and I manage the Passport to College, Passport to Careers program here in Olympia.
Thanks, y'all. And Heidi?
Heidi Townsend, the Director of Financial Aid at Olympic College. And the designated support staff is Patty Thomas, although she is not here on this call today. And I'm in, I work in Bremerton, but I actually live in Hallsville, and that's where I'm calling in from right now.
Okay, thank you for introducing yourself. And I really appreciate all of your time today. We've learned from our past webinars that one of the things people seem to appreciate the most is just hearing about what campuses are doing, the real practices that they're implementing to support scholars. So I really appreciate you joining us from your different campuses and communities to share both the practices that you're using that are working around financial aid for Passport scholars, and we're also going to talk about some challenges that we're encountering today as well. So really quick, if we're successful today, then everyone in attendance will understand Passport requirements related to financial aid practices. You'll understand the Student Achievement Council's role in providing guidance and support in these areas. And then we're going to have a lot of discussion today with our financial aid administrators about both promising practices and challenges, and the way that we're responding to those challenges. So I hope you will learn some really practical ways that campuses are serving students, maybe ways that you can model practices after if you're looking for help with practices in this area. And we are going to try to leave time at the end for question and answer so that we can engage with you, all the participants. So if you have questions today, I'll just note, because there is a question about this, participants are not able to verbally chime in during the webinar today. It's just a limitation of the platform. So you can hear us, but we can't hear you. But what you can do is you can use the chat function as we go to go ahead and ask questions or let me know if you're having challenges. And I'll do what I can to both bring up those questions in real time and also help you with your technology. Our goal is by the end to have still about 15 minutes at the end of the presentation where we can just focus on whatever questions you have. And if you have a lot of questions that you submit today and we don't have time to answer them, in our hour together, then we'll work together to respond to those questions and follow up with you. Okay. So I'm just going to hand it over to Carla and Dawn to kind of talk about the commitments of the institutions as stated in the agreement to participate.
So in the passport addendum, the language reads that each institution will review each student's individual budget to recognize the actual living expenses and tailor the financial aid package to utilize all available resources to meet the student's full need and minimize the reliance on loans. So basically, when a financial aid office is packaging students, there is a standard budget for students, and this can depend and vary whether or not the student is a dependent student or an independent student, whether or not they're living at home or by themselves. And this language that was written in the agreement, what it means is that if needed, the financial administrators can adjust this passport students' cost of attendance to ensure they have an accurate amount of aid for their individual circumstances. And I just wanted to note that this language was carefully chosen by the original Passport Advisory Committee back in 2007. And that committee was made up of financial aid administrators and student supporters. And then last year when we revisited the agreement, we re-reviewed it and the members of the Passport leadership team found that it was still holding true to the program's intent and allowed enough flexibility for financial aid administrators in the process of packaging financial aid for students.
Thanks, Dawn. I think it's really good just to review this language at the beginning of our conversation today. And so a lot of what we talk about is just how institutions interpret and implement this language on their campuses. So Carla, why don't you go ahead with this one?
Okay, and so this is just to explain to all of you how we implement new programs or programs that have been given to us by the legislature. So every session, the legislature either will make changes and or create new programs, and the program law is called the RCW, or Revised Code of Washington. Our agency then follows this process flow that's outlined on the screen you're looking at in implementing those. And so we then take the RCW and develop the Washington Administrative Code and statewide program guidelines based on whatever is contained in the law. And then financial aid administrators take that guidance in addition to the program law and guidelines and create their own college policies and practices to award the aid accordingly. They then have also the authority to exercise professional judgment, and they can document that on a case-by-case basis to make the budget adjustments that Dawn was talking about that still follow the law and guidelines, but it's still tailored to a specific student. And our agency and CSF then will document and share these practices. And so whenever possible, our agency does not stipulate every possible decision or policy. And I know sometimes colleges would like us to do that, but we try to recognize that our college partners are administratively capable, and they're professionals. They know their campuses, they know the population, they know the demographics, and they're best informed to develop the policies that follow the guidelines and the laws that are tied to our programs. We do provide technical assistance as needed, but campuses ultimately retain the authority to develop their institutional practices and policies in accordance with the WSACs, the RCWs, and the program guidelines that we provide.
Thanks, Carla. So having just started with sort of defining that, a lot of the actual decisions that are made about how students are served from the perspective of financial aid on campuses rely on the discretion of financial aid administrators, but are guided by the way that the program is outlined. We're going to get into our conversation with our financial aid administrators to talk about how they support students and to share their recommendations with you. So we're just going to start. I'm going to ask each of the financial aid advisor or administrators on the call today to start by just describing your current practices that you use to implement on the language we looked at before to serve Passport scholars. And I'll start with Heidi.
Thank you. If I'm talking too loudly or not loudly enough, just let me know. Just as a brief overview, basically our current practice was, we identify the Passport students, and then I basically am like I primarily deal with them myself, and I actually I kind of consider it a specialized outreach where I do a one-on-one meeting with them to help them with their FAFSA, to discuss satisfactory progress, the benefits of work study versus loans. I also then, of course, refer students to Patty Thomas in the Students in Need group office for the advocacy. And then Patty, of course, she basically works with them to mentor them, helps them with budgeting. Patty and I collaborate as far as if there's some special situation with a Passport student that maybe we need to, figure out if there's some additional ways that we can help that student if need be. So that's pretty much the way we work it in our office.
And Heidi, can you, what's over the last couple of years, what's the range in terms of the number of students that you've had at Olympic, just for our context?
Yeah, I believe we had as many as 17 at one time. And it's kind of been going back and forth. I believe, though, this year, we now have a few more that we've identified that are now will be eligible once that's been updated in the cruncher. But right now, we probably have between 10 and 13 with any new ones that we've been able to identify.
Great, that's helpful. Okay, Dina and Emmanuel.
Okay, hello. So one of the things that we have actually done at Western for a long time is normally as a financial aid counselor, all of our work is alphabet assigned. But years ago when the College Success Foundation had the Achievers program, it became just so much easier for us to have the financial aid counselor work with special populations. And so I actually serve as the financial aid counselor for all of our Passport students, and they are essentially my files rather than an alphabet assignment. That's really helpful because not only does it help me find students to be able to engage in conversations and have those meetings, but if a student is not meeting satisfactory progress, I'm actually the one that is reviewing their appeal. I am the one that is working through their verification documents. And if there are issues, I can work directly with those students. So I think that's one of the biggest advantages we've seen is that sort of single financial aid counselor. I think it's easier for our students too, to be able to just have one person, a single point of contact for financial aid. One of the things too that we have been doing for a couple of years is really trying to crunch our student population early on. I think so many times in the past we were waiting, our financial aid requirements were such that we needed foster care paperwork, and I know I've worked with Dawn over the last couple of years to really cement that cruncher can give us everything we need. And so we've been doing that for quite a while, but this year I actually got a list of anybody who marked that they were orphan, ward of the court, or foster on their FAFSA and just crunched them all. And we have identified quite a few students that probably may not have come in. One student transferred and didn't think she could get it here, and there was quite a bit of benefit to that. We also do flag our students in our system. Our school uses Banner. So we have a code that helps me ensure that I review the file and make sure that we are meeting the state's requirement to give our foster youth or former foster youth priority funding of work study and state need grant. So that's sort of just that step to make sure that we are getting those students those commitments and not missing out on it. And then, yeah, we work with Emmanuel, but there's been a lot of communication with our new scholars to get them sort of engaged in our group here of support services.
Great. And Dina, how many scholars do you have on campus this year?
This year, it's interesting because we actually doubled our population in 1 year. So we went from about 7 or 8 was our normal average, and we have about 15 or 16 this year, with a couple that we now know will meet the requirements within the next 1 or 2 years based on when they went into foster care, as those requirements have changed or will change in the future.
Great, thanks. Okay, Rosie.
Hello. Along with a lot of the same practices that Heidi and Dina do, we have a team approach here at Eastern with a person in the admissions office and Maria over in academic advising. We all meet together and collaborate in getting the lists out so we all have communication with them. I have given each individual student my personal email and phone number so that they can get in contact with me whenever they need to. Anytime they stop by the office, it's coded that they're a passport or foster youth, and they're just sent directly back to me so they get that one-on-one attention. And I complete all the files and make sure that I send out emails to any of the students who are selected for verification just to be proactive and get that information out to them so I can finish their files up in a timely fashion. And then I monitor their SAP along with everything that everybody else does.
Great, thanks, Rosie. So it's interesting in listening to you all, a couple common themes are coming out. It sounds like, first of all, I think each of your institutions has a single person in the financial aid office that's working with passport scholars. And it sounds like that's been really helpful. It also sounds like you're really taking a team approach with the designated support staff and others on your campus, especially starting with identifying students, which I think we all know that it can be complicated to figure out everyone on your campus who's eligible and then ensure that they have information about the eligibility. And Dina, that's a good scenario you talked about a transfer student. I mean, that's just one example where it really takes some proactive work to identify those students. So I'd like to ask the attendees, if you have any questions about anything that was just said, go ahead and type those into the chat box. And one already came in, so this is from Kathy Nguyen at Highline. Dina, you said that you oversee all the paperwork involving passport students, and that's made things easier. Can you explain how that's made things easier?
Yeah, sure. And, I found every single financial aid office, the way they manage the workload is very, very different. At our school, our counselors pretty much do the entire process. So we do SAP appeals, we do verification, we kind of have that comprehensive. And so one of the things, and again, this goes back even to the achievers, is often if I was having to communicate with multiple other financial aid counselors, I think that we missed out on a lot. If somebody had a satisfactory progress issue and I wasn't the counselor working on that file, perhaps they appealed, I'd have to rely on another counselor to tell me, oh, I approved them, so they're good to go now. So it makes it easier in the way that with a small population, and again, we only have about 15 students, I know what's happening with each and every one of those files. I know each and every one of those students' situations. And because, again, if I had to rely on potentially 7 to 8 different financial aid counselors to let me know when things were happening with each of those scholars, I just think that it slows things down. So this helps me. So if I see a student is struggling, I've reached reached out to the DSS and made that contact because I knew what was going on specifically with everything about that student's file. So that's how it's easier for us.
Great. Another question, this is a pretty specific scenario, but I think I'll ask it and then we'll move on to the next section. And Heidi, this might be most relevant to you. It's coming from Laura at Clark College in Vancouver. So for foster youth who still either live at home with a foster parent or with a biological parent, is it possible to increase their budgets so that they can maximize the resources available to them, and how?
Well, that's one of the things, up until recently, if they said they were living with a parent, we kept it at living with a parent. But just because of, the attributes of this grant, I think that, from a professional judgment standpoint, it makes sense to, consider them as the independent not living with parent budget. Similar to what we do with the the living with parent for college bound, the school has leeway to not adhere to the 25% self-help piece. And so we do that with the college bound. So going forward, especially with the way they've expanded the passport, I'm just going to make it a modification of the policy that they should be allowed to have the not living with parent budget so that we can give them a more enhanced award package.
Great. Thanks, Heidi.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's move on and let's talk about some challenges. So for the audience, we did a little preparation yesterday and we just talked about some common challenges, and we're going to talk about these topic by topic and just have some discussion with all the panelists. So panel, we talked about this yesterday. The first kind of challenge is really around incentive grant utilization and making the most out of these dollars without having unintended consequences with students' financial aid packages. So let's just jump in. Who'd like to start talking about how you do this on your campus?
Here at Eastern, we're finding that a lot of students weren't buying their books and needed some of that incentive money to do that. Maria then coordinated with me in talking about the financial aid budget that we have, and books are part of that budget. So therefore, we came up with the fact of having a book bank. So Maria could buy the specific books that are needed, and the students would check them out, so sign up for them and do that, and then they return the book at the end of the quarter. So that way it wasn't part of the financial aid budget that we needed to consider.
Great. So that's just one really specific example of ways to use the money, get the students what they need without it changing their package. What are other observations about challenges in this area and ways that you've responded to them?
Yes, I can say something. I think one of the things that challenge we've had is that, we're lucky to be at an institution where a lot of support things that perhaps programming wise for our students as a small population is sort of already taken care of. So we have been challenged with coming up with ways, because direct student payments has implications for financial aid. So we kind of have that kind of issue at times, but then trying to find ways to, I think with a small cohort, find ways to utilize it, because our career services provides lots of great support services already. So it's not that we have to hire necessarily a career person, because we have that staff that can do that. So I think that is one, is that we are still trying to come up with great ways to spend this, and certainly student support as needed, but yeah, systematic approaches to do it when your university has provided quite a bit of services.
I want to acknowledge.
This is Heidi.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, I was just going to add, yeah, that's one of our challenges too, along with what Maria and Dina were mentioning. But so we also have the lending library, but then we do issue gift cards so that there's not an impact to their, you know, their financial aid package. We also do use the whatever percentage is allowed to contribute to support staff, paying support staff. And then, you know, social events. We'll get social events like pizza party or whatever, where we'll invite other, like a financial aid person, maybe somebody from one of the other departments that, you know, to where we can mingle and get to know those students and answer any kind of questions that they may have about things.
Got it. Okay, I think we could spend a lot more time talking about incentive grant, but we have more to cover, so we'll move on. I just want to acknowledge on the chat, there was some responses to Heidi's earlier point and explaining about how you might use at Olympic, you're going to be using discretion to set a budget, an independent student budget for students who may be living with a caregiver. And it just sounds like there's a lot of people who would love to learn more about that. And specifically, folks are asking, what does our financial aid office need to move forward with this option? And I don't want to answer this incorrectly, but it sounded to me based on what you said, Heidi, that as the director, you're using professional discretion to do that under the guidance of the program, which gives you some flexibility. Am I interpreting that explanation correctly, Heidi, and then Dawn and Carla?
Yes. Yeah, I would say yes. That's a good encapsulation. Yep. Mm-hmm.
And I would just add that this is a prime example of what Carla had been talking about, where, you know, we have the law and the WSAC, and this is an institutional
Professional judgment.
Yeah, professional judgment that they would be making.
The institution has to document and be able to explain and defend, but we're not going to dictate that at this point.
Right. So what I hear WSAC saying is that you all have the flexibility, your financial aid directors have the flexibility to make these determinations, and I hear Heidi saying she's going to make that at Olympic. So if others are thinking that would be a good direction, maybe, you know, I'd encourage you to reach out to Heidi or other panelists today, and maybe you can just check in or have your, if you're not the financial aid director at your college, maybe you could connect them so that they could do a little peer technical assistance just by talking it out. Okay, so second challenge that we talked about yesterday was this issue of third-party payments and coordination of benefits. And in our conversation, there's many examples of this for foster youth, but one that came up was the ETP program. So can anyone summarize the conversation we had about how we're encountering some challenges and what they are?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and jump in on that one, because we basically had to establish we asked other departments to establish, but in working with like our workforce development department, and we basically made a procedure where we'll notify not just passport students, but students that we might have be awarding mutually. We let them know when we've awarded a student, you know, and they're fully awarded and there's no more room in their award package. We basically notify other internal departments so that the student doesn't risk getting over awarded. And then our business office, we had them establish a procedure where If a student's already been awarded financial aid and the business office has to, you know, basically back out the financial aid and replace it with retroactive payment, their procedure is to notify us so that we don't over award the student. That's one of the things that we've done.
Great. So that there's a lot about communication there, and it's both with external third parties, but also internally on your campus with other programs as well, it sounds like.
Right, and it's also just a matter of helping at least the other departments that are awarding to help them understand that, you know, it's not us trying to, you know, hold the student back. We're just trying to make sure that they don't wind up in a bad situation where they've become over awarded and we have to take money away, and then they have no other options for resources for the rest of the year. So, and that's, you know, that's really what we try to help them understand, is that it's really to the student's benefit to make sure that we communicate with one another.
Great. So what do the other panelists have to add on this one?
I'll go. I think that is something that we talked a little bit about yesterday, is that as financial aid administrators, we're often seen as the bad guys, the ones that are trying to take away funding from students. And so it's about educating our colleagues, because yeah, I think on campus, we do need to make sure the rest of our campus understands kind of the consequences of us finding about resources after the fact. But we did talk quite a bit about ETV yesterday, in that as much as the program has changed in great ways for students are able to access those funds so much easier. It's a blessing for them to be able to get the money. But what has happened is, because there's not as much communication with DCYF, that we've had a couple students who sent in a copy of their award letter before there was resources added, like Passport wasn't in their award. And so the amount that ETV may have come up with is the wrong amount. And so because now students can check a couple boxes as to what they need the funding for, and they get the money directly, that's where we're having some significant problems, because we don't have the money coming in where we can sort of adjust financial aid as we see it come in. Was on campus. But yeah, so that's still a challenge. We're trying to figure out ways and really have our students understand their role in it too, that they do need to report those resources.
Rosie, anything to add?
The only thing I would add would the timeliness of getting that information from those outside resources, not as an afterthought, but as early as possible in receiving those, so that we don't have overload situations.
So do you, sorry to spring this on you, this wasn't part of our prep yesterday, but when you think of ETV or other third-party resources, can you think of a situation where there was a really good outcome for a student, where they had their needs met and they were within like they did everything right with their financial aid? And if so, like what led to that outcome?
You talking to me specifically, or just anybody?
Oh, anyone. I'm just wondering, we've talked a little bit about how it's challenging to get all the communication just right. I'm wondering if there's an example where that did happen, and an example like that.
I did have one, excuse me, of the ETV recipients notify me up front, telling me that they had received that. And this individual student has just been so upfront in telling me about all their resources that they've been receiving, that it was just nice to have everything done in a row. So I just wish the agency would have.
So when students are,
earlier.
Is it part of your practice that when you have a first meeting with a student about their financial aid, that you talk about that you talk about this issue and the student's responsibility to communicate as they get resources that may not otherwise be communicated to you?
I do. And 9 out of 10 of them say, I don't even know what ETV is. But, 5 of them received it, so.
Yeah. Okay. Any other thoughts or reflections on this one before we move on to the last one?
No, but I agree. I think that the students who are really taking an active role in participating, because I actually had a student who is very good about this. She knew she had it. She and I were the ones that told Kathy that to reduce the amount because we knew exactly what her unmet need was after Passport had been added. So she communicated with, Kathy to say, no, it's not actually as high as you think. I talked to my financial aid person. It's only supposed to be X. And so she actually really, when students get engaged. So yeah, I'm thinking that whether it be meeting in person, something to get students kind of a little bit more aware of that.
Well, it's a great transition to our last challenge, which is student engagement. So, I mean, this is a great example where, Dina, just building on what you just said, it's, in order to get the packages right, in order to make the right determinations, students have to be involved in the process. It can't just be the professionals communicating without them in the conversation. But we also have some challenges as relates to student engagement these may be challenges that happen generally with many students, but with Passport students, I think, tend to see a lot of challenges with student engagement. So let's talk a little bit about what does that challenge look like and how are you all responding to that?
Manuel,
so I can address that. So I am the DSS, but I'm also the academic advisor for all of these Passport scholars as well. They are technically assigned to advise with me, but of course we have all different number of advisors on campus, so they can reach out to anyone. I think one particular issue for us has been when we have events and do activities with students, out of the 15 that we have, we normally have a turnout of about 4 or 5 students, and it's always been the same 4 or 5 students, even though all of them have received communication, have received an invitation, have been in contact with, but it always turns out to be those same students. So for me as their academic advisor, I also have the ability to look at their academics. And so I communicate with them, or at least send emails to all of them for academic purposes. And it's been difficult, at least this year, where students are not necessarily responding or actively being engaged with the contact or the information that I've been sending to the students.
Thanks, Emmanuel.
Can I add? Because one of the things we talked about, and I don't know if it happens at other schools or if some schools have texting capability, I don't know. But one of the things we've sort of talked about with this population of students and a lot of our students is they get so many emails. Students are sort of inundated with school emails, not as a reason why they shouldn't pay attention, but I think that's a challenge that even at a larger university level, that when they're constantly getting emails from Western, it starts minimizing the importance of them. And so I think our students tend to, sometimes I'll call because I get a better response because they just ignore the emails. But yeah, we've sort of been struggling in how to make sure students are kind of paying attention and then responding.
Yeah. Maria, do you have thoughts on this
Yes, I made her get on camera, finally.
I saw her squeeze in with this question here.
So yes, so I was able to hire a student to be a mentor. So she's going through a certification to be a mentor, and she's mentoring our new freshmen. And so that's been huge for us because we continued the what we used to have as navigators. And so our student really, from week 1, we got her introduced to the students, and then they started making regular weekly appointments. And so she's been meeting with them on a weekly basis, and then she's able to meet with me once a week and let me know which students haven't been coming, which ones are struggling. She can text me right away, but the students don't have my phone number, so she's that liaison between the students and then me. And so that's been great. And we put on quite a few events this year. Our big one was George Duvall, who was our guest speaker. And so I've just seen how the difference has been to have that peer relationship and really help with putting on events for us, and really I feel more connected with them because of her role.
Great. Yeah, and again, I you know, the topic today is financial aid, but this engagement piece is so important because we know when students are having challenges, a lot of times it is because there's a need that's not being addressed. And what I notice is, you know, our students are so resourceful that oftentimes I think where this third-party payment challenge really comes up is a student is having let's say they're having food insecurity or housing insecurity, and they have a whole network of support. They may be going to that network of support without the knowledge of anyone on campus. And they may also not know that if they receive monetary support, that it may be reportable to financial aid. And they won't, you know, we may not catch that till much, much later unless the student's engaging like through the peer navigator or through the DSS. So it really is a piece like in that feedback loop that always has to be happening. That's where a lot of the breakdown happens when we don't have the engagement. Mm-hmm. Heidi, did you have anything to add before we move on?
No, I just was going to clarify that I agree. I mean, I think for us, just having that single point of contact and then just being proactive and reaching out to them, for me, it's like, I mean, even just saying I'm just touching base, making sure everything's okay. So, you know, reaching out even when maybe, you know, there's nothing going on, just to make sure they know, you know, that you're there thinking about them and wanting to make sure that they're doing okay. So
that's great.
Fred, before we move on, can I just, Maria was able to hire that young lady using incentive grant funding. So that's a great utilization of that. And we've also hired several other work study students around campus.
Yeah. Yeah, no, thank you for that. That did come up before. Like, I know that Dina, you mentioned, you know, trying to figure out good ways to spend the incentive grant money. And this certainly seems to be a good way is, you know, hiring peer navigators, work study students, grad assistants to help boost staff capacity and build in that kind of near peer model with the incentive grant funding. Okay, so we're getting close to where we're going to do questions and answers. And so before we jump into that, I'm just curious, for each of you, yesterday I kind of asked if you had a recommendation for our attendees or like something that you call like a best practice on your campus. Could you describe that for everyone? So Rosie, go ahead and describe what you said about it, your team approach and shared planning.
Well, it starts when I get the wonderful list from the beautiful Miss Dawn. And once I receive that list, I then coordinate with Maria, one of the other academic advising, Nathan and Nathaniel, sorry, mm-hmm. and Manny in our admissions office. And we try to meet at least quarterly to go over and see what problems, what other communications we can have. Manny starts with going out and for recruitment purposes, I send an email out telling them that we've received their FAFSA, that they're a verification, just so they have that me as a point of contact, and that then Maria, et cetera, then will contact them in regards to when their first step dates are, so that they can meet with them and tell them all the wonderful opportunities that we have for them. And then just notifying that they can talk to any of us in regards to anything, and we will communicate and do a group email, so we aren't getting it, well, you know, you told Manny this, and he told Maria this, and then he told me this, so we're all on the same page.
Gotcha. Yeah, just something that I think is pretty unique at Eastern that I've noticed is how engaged the admissions team and recruitment team is.
We're very lucky.
That's really cool, because that's where the identification of students really kind of begins.
Yes.
Heidi, we've talked about this a little bit already, but what else do you have to say about your focus on student engagement at Olympic?
I really, I believe that targeted proactive outreach is probably, I think, at the top of the list, at least as far as what's worked really well, and to get, at least from the very beginning, then it's easier to get those special populations engaged when you invite them to an activity, or when, you know, it encourages them to feel comfortable and safe to be able to approach you without, you know, having been asked if they are having issues or need to talk about something, whatever that might be. So, I mean, for us, I really think that having, you know, that targeted outreach, having basically the same people that are working with these students to where they're throughout their time at Olympic College, they feel that they have somebody that they can go to if need be.
And Dina, you were talking about this thing about how important the relationship is between the on-campus champions. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, and it's funny because we don't have this perfected yet. This is also just a plan in which we think is a really good idea, because it is really important that we as a team meet regularly. I like the notes here, plan and coordinate. You know, we have specific students that we both know about, so we can have those communications, but it came up in our sort of incentive grant planning that even using it for a lunch out to really reinforce the idea that we are partnering on behalf of the students. And so it's really important for us to kind of communicate regularly, and everybody knows day in, day out, you get kind of pulled away all the time. So I think having sort of regular scheduled meetings would be a great way. We've actually now, because of the incentive grant planning, have kind of even a larger team that is really interested. And so kind of keeping that regular is a really big goal, because we see some benefits to that.
Great. And as we'll close up this and go into Q&A. I know we had one more note. Heidi, this is kind of really related to what we're talking about. You just want to explain what your last note here, the importance of the DSS knowing community resources.
Sorry, I had a problem with my mute button. Yeah, so our DSS, I think it's just really imperative that those people that are the advocates for these individuals, or any student really with needs, that having a broad knowledge of community resources, I think it's very valuable, and it's really necessary, because especially in cases where if a student's been awarded a fully up and has no more need to where you can give them any resources from the school, this way there's other resources that are available that aren't going to jeopardize their financial aid.
Great. So at this point, attendees, it is almost 3 o'clock, but we're going to spend about 10 minutes doing question and answer, and then we'll close. So please chat in any of the questions that you have at this time. It can really be anything related to financial aid and passport. We don't need to have talked about, it doesn't have to be related to something we specifically talked about so far today. And there are a couple coming in. So Deborah from Central is wondering, Maria, you mentioned that the peer mentor is receiving a certification, and she's wondering, are you using incentive grant funds to pay for the training and certification for that student employee?
No, I'm not. We have a program that's working with students, and they receive a mentor. And so I asked the coordinator, she also reports to me. So I asked her if I could include another student to be a part of their certification. And so we did that over the summer. They start training over the summer. So I didn't have to pay anything extra. She was just included in the process of being certified.
Nice. So that happened at no cost.
Right. It's through CRLA.
Great. So one thing we haven't really talked about today, but that's really important for students we serve is kind of what happens when a student faces academic challenges and there's a disruption in financial aid, and then they want to start at school again. So a lot of things can happen here, especially if students don't withdraw correctly. And obviously they can go into probation, or they can become ineligible for their aid. And my question to the panelists is, we know this happens a lot with our students. So is there anything you're doing to really support students through these times when their financial aid is disrupted to help get them back on track?
We have a sort of I call it a round table, but our, like our workforce development, our BFET funding, that sort of thing, they oftentimes will help not just passport students, but really any students that that maybe need to self-reinstate. They'll, there's typically other funding. Sometimes the foundation will step in and help a student pay for classes in order to self-reinstate, and also, provide additional, funding if they need for like just associated resources like books or supplies, whatever. But that's one of the ways that a lot of our students are able to become eligible again, just, in one quarter, having a different department fund their self-reinstatement.
Thanks, Heidi. Anything else to add on this one?
I don't think we've encountered it very often. I mean, I would say that our SAP policy or our SAP appeal is relatively generous. And again, I'm hopeful that because I work with those students one-on-one, that I'm kind of aware of the situation. Again, I am the counselor that's reviewing their appeals, so I sometimes know that they haven't included everything in their appeal. So I'm asking them, hey, we've talked about this, but I don't see that represented, because our appeals are done by a individual counselor unless it gets to the point where somebody is feeling they need to deny it, and then it has to go to a committee. But yeah, I think sometimes knowing a little bit more, but we don't tend to have a lot of students who have left and then tried to come back, where maybe they have that in jeopardy. It's more, they're a current student, they might struggle, but they seem to have worked it out and their appeal gets approved. So we haven't really encountered it too much.
So prevent the disruption in the first place.
Hopefully.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Great. All right. Panelists, is there anything else that's just on your mind about like these financial aid issues? Anything we've discussed today, or maybe something we haven't discussed that before we log off you wanna share what you're thinking? And this could be about a best practice that you want to share you haven't had a chance to share yet, or a challenge that you just think it's important for everyone to be thinking about so that we can address it for our students in a better way. Dawn or Carla, any reflections you have on the subject in general? Anything we haven't covered today that you'd like to make sure gets said?
I think mainly it's being able to get the questions from the institutions and respond accordingly. And I don't know, Fred, if this is part of the technology platform, but once you post this recording, is there then a venue for people watching it on a delayed response to be able to submit questions as follow-up, or just direct them to the Passport mailbox maybe?
Yeah, no, that's great. So anyone watching this as a recording that's after the fact, please send any questions you have to Passport, the Passport at WSAC email, or you can send any questions to me or members of my team. My email is fkingston@collegesuccessfoundation.org, and I can pass those questions along to Dawn and Carl and the WSAC team. But between us, we want to get back to you with the best information that we can. So folks will see that. Okay. Anything else for the good of the order, panelists? Coming back to you one more time. All right.
Fred, I just like to say you are a very good facilitator.
Oh, thanks, Heidi. Ha! Appreciate that. I've been having a lot of practice, but I do wish it was easier to get everyone on the darn webinar platform a little easier. Anyway, thanks attendees. I hope this was helpful today. We are going to be sending out a survey at the end, right after we log off here. And so please, this survey will take you less than 3 minutes to fill out. We want to make these webinars better and better for you, and we need your input in order to do that. So please respond to the survey you'll get as soon as you log off. Our next webinar for our network is going to be on January 9th at 2 p.m. And it's a trauma-informed care training, and it's presented by the community education team at Coordinated Care. I think this is a very, very important training for anyone working with foster youth and financial aid administrators. I think that you would find this very relevant and beneficial, especially given our conversation today about student engagement. This having a trauma-informed lens is just critical to really knowing how to meet our students where they're at. So please do consider attending in January. I hope you have a wonderful holiday season, and please reach out to us if you have any questions. Thanks a lot, panelists.
Thank you.
Couldn't do it without you.
Thank you.
We'll see y'all next time. Bye-bye.